Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to ProMed's webinar tonight on multiple casualty incidents. Thank you to everyone who's telling us where we're from. I can see we've got a good spread of people across the UK and indeed across Europe. I've got a good variety of people from sort of first responder up to paramedic level, and about half of you have in some way attended some sort of major incident, which is excellent. So tonight we're going to be looking at multiple casualty incidents and the initial actions that we take on scene and how we triage casualties when we get there. So this is a free webinar provided by ProMed. I'm Matt, I'm Managing Director of ProMed. I have done the MIMS qualification. I'm also a qualified teacher and I'm FREC 4 certified. So that's a little bit about my background. ProMed does provide some training courses. We have a website there if you want to have a look. We have the FREC 3 course, which is running in the near future, £355. That runs at on a From Our Centre in Aylesbury. We then also have the level 4 in FREC, that's starting on the 8th of August, 395 plus VAT, and the level 4 immediate life support, which is 125 plus VAT. We also run the level 3 safe administration of life-saving meds. So if you do have a look on our website, you'll find details of all those courses and you're able to I'm just going to mute myself for a second while I deal with the feedback. I couldn't hear you through the laptop. Okay, we shouldn't hear each other. All right. Can I? What button here? Oh, I can hear a lot of echo. Okay, apologies about the echo. I'm not entirely sure what is going on there. Just going to mute again and try that again. think it might be easy now. Something's not right. There's... We've sorted out the issue there. Apologies, it will work all that well. Nope, we're just going to try that once more. Okay. Okay, right. Nope, we still seem to have a slight issue. I'm just going to try and fix that once more. I will be back with you. Okay, fingers crossed. There we go. We can't have any echo. Okay, apologies for the delay and the feedback that we've been having so far. So we are going to get started. Just to make you aware that we do have a code of conduct for all of our webinars. Everybody has the right to expect a space free from bullying, intimidation and harassment, to be treated with dignity, respect and courtesy, and not to be discriminated against. Obviously, we are going to be talking about some sensitive topics tonight, and you will have some opinions on those. We welcome everybody's opinion and experience, and we just ask that everybody does respect those. So tonight we are going to be looking at multiple casualty incidents. So we're going to kind of define what a multiple casualty incident is, what a mass casualty incident is, and what a major incident is. For some of you, you might be out in your day-to-day life and you might find yourself already in a situation that's occurred. So what can you do if you're there with no equipment, and what are we actually thinking the public are going to do in those scenarios? We'll then move on to being the professionals that we are. I'm sure we're all here because we are professionals. We are paid to provide a service, whether that's for the NHS, whether that's for an event medical company or some other form. So when we turn up in uniform, what should we be doing? We're going to look briefly at the triage sieve and triage sort in the field, and we're going to discuss how to compose a methane message. We will touch briefly on Jessup and some of the other major incident principles in this session, but it is only an introduction, so we won't be going into very much depth. So throughout this webinar, we are going to make reference to some real incidents that have occurred in the last 40 years, and the inquiry and review documents for those have been used to support some points made in the slides. I'm aware that some people in the webinar may have actually attended some of those incidents in person, so if you do have your own experiences, that's absolutely fine. We would love to hear from you. So the first thing is a multiple casualty incident. Now, a multiple casualty incident is where the number of casualties exceeds the capacity of the available healthcare resources at its absolute simplest. However, I've put a couple of extra words in as well. Not yet. And that is temporarily and at the incident. So an example could be if you're doing a running event and you've got a finish line and 10 people in quick succession come across that finish line and collapse, and you've maybe only got 4 spotters in that area. So at that particular point in time, you could argue you have a multiple casualty incident because you've got 10 casualties on the floor who all require some attention, but you've only got 4 people capable of providing that attention. However, it's a temporary issue because you can very easily call on the support from the finish line medical centre or from the ambulance that's sat waiting next to you, and you can then deal with those casualties and have them taken off to an appropriate place. So at that incident, there's a multiple casualty incident, but for the overall event, you don't have one. So more resources are generally needed to deal with a multiple casualty incident, but they are often very containable within a short time. So they still need to be talked about. They still need to be informed to medical control or medical management, but nobody needs to be panicking. Nobody needs to be thinking that this is too big or something that we can't deal with. The other side of multiple casualty incidents is the definition that I'm sure we're all familiar with from any kind of first response or clinical training. And that's where we have 3 or more casualties in close proximity who are incapacitated with no obvious reason. So we've all kind of came across this, and what we know from that is there is a reason, we just can't see it for ourselves. So we use the step 1, 2, 3 plus approach. So step 1 is if we have one person who's incapacitated with no obvious reason, we'd approach them using the standard protocols that we always do. If we have 2 people incapacitated and we're not sure why, then we're going to approach with caution using the standard protocols. So by approach with caution, we're going to approach from upwind and uphill if possible. And we're going to be paying a lot of attention to our surroundings and a lot of attention to everything that's going on. And we're going to make sure that we're informing our control at every step of the way. For step 3, if we have 3 or more people who are incapacitated with no obvious reason, we're going to be using a lot of caution and we're going to be doing the plus. That means we are not going to approach those casualties. We're going to call it in and we're going to evacuate. We're going to get people away from the scene. We're going to communicate to our control room. We're going to communicate to other bystanders and we're going to advise them. And even if that's just help is on its way and we are going to help you, that is enough to start reassuring people. We're then going to look at disrobing. So if people have been contaminated and are starting to show symptoms, remove clothing down to underwear. If there's something contaminating in the air, it will go onto clothing first. Then we do decontamination. So we've got improvised decontamination whilst they're awaiting full support to be available. So if it's non-caustic agents, if it's powders, we can just use a dry decontamination with paper towels or anything else that we have to hand. And if it's a caustic kind of contamination, we'd be looking at a wet decontamination where possible. So cold running water and in copious amounts. Rapid scene management here is critical to the saving of life. So if we've identified there's a problem, there's 2 things we need to do. We need to not become a casualty ourselves, and we need to ensure that anybody who's around us also doesn't become a casualty. So using our voice, providing that calm, reassuring approach is exactly what we need. So we've looked at multiple casualty incidents. We're now going to look at what a mass casualty incident is. So we're going to throw up a quick question, and I want to know how many casualties would you say are needed for a mass casualty incident? Your options are 10, 25, 100, 250, 1,000, 2,500, 10,000, or 25,000. Okay, great to see over a quarter of you voted there. Okay, almost 2/3 of you have voted. That's great. Okay, fantastic. So let's just have a look at the results that we've thrown out there. So a lot of you there have gone for 10. Some of you went for 25 and some of you went for 100. So a mass casualty incident could just be a significant transport accident. It could be a terrorist attack, or it could be another major incident scenario. Now, looking at the National Ambient Resilience Unit definitions, they have a national interoperability protocol for their mass casualty equipment vehicles, and they can cope with 100 priority 1 patients and 250 priority 2 or 3 patients upon the arrival of the first vehicle. Those vehicles are located in strategic positions across the UK, usually in ambulance stations, and there are 24 of them. So the theory being, within 12 hours, you can have a capacity to deal with 8,400 patients in total. Depending on where you are in the UK, near me we have Warrington. You could have 2 of those vehicles within about 20 minutes. If I were in Carlisle, as another example, you probably look at an hour and a half before I even get one of them there. And that's something, if you're planning a large event and you're looking after the medical provision at a large event, you would want to have in the back of your mind, I've got a significant number of people here, what would happen if they became injured? So to put those numbers, that 8,400 into perspective, if you take Glastonbury Festival, that's less than 5% of its attendees. Or if we look at Reading Festival, which is just near a town centre, less than 10% of the attendees there is 8,400. Emirates Stadium in London, only 15% of its capacity, so a busy match day. If you take a typical shopping centre like the Into Trafford Centre or Bluewater, it's around about a third. Same for the Scottish Exhibition Centre. For other venues like the Motorpoint Arena in Cardiff or Millennium Square Leeds, that would require every single person attending to become a casualty, and we would need that significant level of deployment. Now, that's not all that many people to need the National Interoperability Protocol to be rolled out in full. So as event medical professionals, we need to be looking at how we're going to manage those kind of numbers without relying on this national approach, because it'll take a lot of time to get that. And for some of our events, it's actually a very small proportion of our attendees that would need to be alive and injured. So a major incident has several definitions. So the first definition I'm going to read out is an emergency means an event or situation which threatens serious damage to a place in the United Kingdom. We also have, from a very similar place, an event or situation requiring a response under one or more of the emergency services major incident plans. You could also say a major incident is an event or situation with a range of serious consequences which requires special arrangements to be implemented by one or more emergency responder agencies. And lastly, in health service terms, a major incident can be defined as any incident where the number, severity, or type of live casualties requires extraordinary resources. So just going to throw up a quick poll. Which one of those definitions is the GESIP definition, and which one of those definitions is the MIMS definition? Okay, 2/5 of you have voted. They're up to half of you have voted. That's fantastic. Okay, let's have the final third of people voting. Let's see where we get overall. Okay, this is really tough because they're all quite similar, but there are some kind of different definitions. Now, the thing to remember is that GESIP is all of the emergency services together. So 36% of you got that absolutely correct by saying an event or situation with a range of serious consequences which requires special arrangements to be implemented by one or more emergency responder agencies comes from GESIP. The MIMS definition, because MIMS is Major Incident Medical Management and Support, they've defined in health service terms, a major incident can be defined as any incident where the number, severity, or type of live casualties requires extraordinary resources. And that word live makes a really big difference, because a dead casualty, whilst unfortunate, of course, isn't actually a major incident necessarily for the health services. And the reason for that is, once we've done what we need to do at the scene in terms of recognising life as extinct, it then becomes a responsibility of the police who are acting on behalf of the coroner. A doctor will, through that arrangement, need to certify those deceased, but for the health service, the ambulance service and the hospitals, they won't necessarily need to be implementing their major incident protocols there. The first definition for your reference, is what it says in the Civil Contingencies Act 2004 as amended, section 1. And your second definition is from the Cabinet Office's Emergency Responder Interoperability Lexicon. So even across those agencies in government, there's still slight differences between what they consider to be a major incident. Now, major incidents come in all different shapes and sizes. I'm sure for the half of you that have been to major incidents, you'll agree with the sentiment that I've often heard expressed, which is no two incidents are ever the same. So in its simplest form, we can say that they're natural or man-made. So a natural incident could be a flood, a fire, or an earthquake. And quite often they're self-propagating. So for a flood or an earthquake, that would have people displaced from their homes, that would have perhaps waterborne diseases, that would have injuries associated with being homeless or illnesses associated from squalor. So that might be longer lasting. Whereas a man-made disaster, things like terrorism, transportation, mass gatherings and industry tend to be that big bang, which happens, but then not very much else happens thereafter. It's quite self-containing rather than self-propagating. We can also define them as being simple or compound. So your simple incidents are just the incidents themselves. The hospitals are all open and fully staffed. The communications work on site, the communications work back to the control room. So the infrastructure, all of the roads, everything we need to handle those patients is fully intact. A compound incident is where the transportation networks that we need to use for those casualties, or the communications that we're trying to use on site, or the communication between the ambulance service and the hospital is in any way not working as optimally as it's designed to, or where the health services are ineffective. So for instance, if there was a secondary bomb at a hospital, or a marauding terrorist firearms attack that caused the hospital to go on lockdown, you would then have a compounded incident that's no longer simple. We then have compensated versus uncompensated incidents. A compensated incident is where the load is less than the extraordinary capacity, and that makes up the vast majority of incidents that have taken place in the UK. Once the emergency services have known that an incident has taken place, they've stopped responding to the lower priority incidents that are coming through on 999, and they've started to send more and more resources as they become available, or divert resources to get them to that incident. And we then start to get a handle on it. Our command structures go in place, the resources all have jobs to do, and all those casualties are either being treated or they're known about and there is a plan to treat them. So it's compensated. An uncompensated incident, thankfully, is very rare in the United Kingdom, and that's where the load of live casualties exceeds the surge capacity of the health agency response. So that would be your examples of some of the Indian disasters, like Bhopal, where you have an ever kind of increasing number of casualties and you're not able to get that health service response where it needs to be. So we're just going to look at two recent incidents now, and I want you to answer whether you consider them to be natural, man-made, simple, compound, compensated, uncompensated. And we're going to look at the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, and we're going to look at the Grenfell Tower also in 2017. So look at those definitions. Do you think those incidents are natural or man-made? Do you think that they're simple or compound? Do you think that they're compensated or uncompensated? Well done to the first person for having a go there. That's excellent. I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that because it does take you a while to get your head around. So just look at that slide, look at those definitions. Up to 10% of people now. I can see a lot of people are absolutely on the right lines. Grenfell is a little bit trickier for some people. Just really refer to those definitions, especially that first one. Okay, that's absolutely great. So I can see that 90% of you absolutely know the Manchester Arena attack quite well there. It's man-made, it's an act of terrorism. It's simple because the hospitals, the communications, and the infrastructure that we needed were all intact. Obviously, there was the issue with Network Rail and the railway not being able to run, but none of the emergency services were relying on that particular piece of infrastructure to manage the incident. And it was compensated very quickly, and very quickly indeed, testament to those responders. They had more than sufficient resources to deal with the immediate threat, the immediate casualties, and they managed that extremely well. Grenfell, let's have a look. 18% of you got that one correct. So a fire, according to the definitions from MIMS, is a natural incident. Your next choices on that were whether it was compound or simple, because I only gave you compensated, and it was compensated because they did send significant volumes of firefighters, significant number of ambulance resources, and a healthy dose of police as well. But it was a compound incident because there were so many issues with communication due to partially the metal shielding and partially due to the thick concrete of the building caused radio communications issues on that site. There was also issues with the video link from the helicopter not being available, so that overview wasn't available to commanders. So it's quite easy to say that communication and the kind of infrastructure that was supporting was quite ineffective for a period of time. And it took a while to get the hang of that. So we're now going to move on and we're going to look at JESIP. Now, JESIP is something that people always seem to get confused over. Whenever I ask somebody what JESIP means, I always seem to get a range of different answers. So if we look at our little poll that's about to come up, I just want to see, what do you think JESIP means? Is it the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Protocols, the Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles, the Joint Emergency Services Interagency Protocols, or the Joint Emergency Services Interagency Principles? Seem to have a lot of confident people answering really quickly. Half of you are voting. And of those, half of you so far have got this correct. Just going to give you a few more seconds for the rest of you there. Okay, so 46% of you know that JESIP is our Joint Emergency Services Interoperability Principles. Okay, it's the principles that guide what we do together between all of the different organizations, agencies, and people on scene. And the most important part of this is joint working. So whether we are an event medical provider, whether we are an NHS ambulance service, whether we are the British Transport Police, the local constabulary, the Fire and Rescue Service, the Event Fire and Rescue Service, whether we are National Rail, whether we are the venue owner, whether we are the production team at the event, we all need to work together to achieve a desirable outcome. Because if we're not working together and we're all going off and doing our own thing, we're going to start to struggle to actually get anywhere because we're going to be working against each other. So the first thing that we need to do is co-locate. So everybody needs to come together and they then need to communicate. So everybody needs to say what's going on. Everybody needs to say what their goals are. And by doing that, we can then start to develop something. So we're going to coordinate together. We're going to coordinate our approach. So everybody sets out what they want, and together we're then going to work out how we can achieve that, and everybody can do their own thing without causing anybody else any problems. We need to jointly understand the risk. So the police might have a view on a terrorist attack, but also the fire service might have a view on the structure that's now a bit of a mess because the bomb was blown up underneath it. The ambulance service will have a view as to how long the casualties are going to survive. The event production team or the crowd management team might have a view as to what the 25,000 uninjured people on site might be causing a problem with. So it's important that we all come together and we all understand everybody else's risk, because actually that forms part of our own picture in our own organisation. And that leads to shared situational awareness. So any one player understands what is going on the same as any other player, no matter what organisation they're from. Everybody knows why we're doing what we're doing, what risks are going to be a problem to us, and how we need to communicate with one another. And this brings up the joint decision model. So it's formally, we start at the top. So we're gathering that information intelligence. That's coming from those phone calls, those 999 calls. It's coming from those first radio messages. It's coming from CCTV, police helicopter, all sorts of different sources of information. So if you're somebody who is on the ground, your role is to be the eyes and ears of the control room, of the commanders, because if you're not giving them that intelligence, then they're working blind and they're struggling to get that shared situational awareness because you've got some awareness that you're not communicating. So that just goes back to those principles there. So you're going to assess the risks and you're going to develop a working strategy. Then you're going to consider your powers, your policies and procedures. So who can do what? Who has got the power to do something? Who has got the resource to do something? Who has got the procedure to do that task? What support might your organisation be able to offer them, or what support does your organisation need to get there? We're then going to identify the options and contingencies, because whilst we've came up with our working strategy, that might change over time. You can't put all your eggs in one basket, because something can change in a moment. Something can develop slowly, and that causes you to rethink what that working strategy is. So once you've set people aware with that working strategy, as commander, you're going to be thinking, right, what else can we do? Is there another approach that might work better? If our current strategy fails or isn't optimal, what contingency plan are we going to have in place to deal with that? We're going to take that action and we're going to review what happened. That review is information, it is intelligence. And then we go back. And the whole purpose of this joint decision model is that everybody works together to save lives and reduce harm, which is in the middle. It is that underpinning concept for the whole process. And within that are decision controls. So those decision controls are people challenging one another. So we're going to be asking, I like your strategy, but is that going to work in this area? Or I can see why we can do that, but actually I'm not sure we've got the power to do that. So everybody is asking each other questions, and we're making sure that we are actually addressing everything there. Now, if you haven't already downloaded the JESIP app, admin team is going to just pop a link into the chat. It's really useful to have on your phone because it contains the interoperability principles and it contains some other useful things that we're going to mention. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of CSCAT. So quickly pop in the chat if you can remember what any of the words are for CSCAT. If you've done MIMS training, and a few of you said you had, you should be able to remember quite a lot of this. Connor Ellis, I'm looking at you for an answer. Command, absolutely the first thing. Well done, Diane. So without command, nobody is accountable. Without command, everybody is going off and doing their own thing. So well done there for Jay. Safety is our next consideration. We don't just rush into a scene, because we could then become the next casualty, and the people who we're telling to do something could get harmed. So we'll look at that safety as the next thing. Communication, absolutely important. So when we get there, we need to communicate to our control room. If there are other agencies already at scene, we need to communicate with them on the ground. We can't forget about communicating with members of the public, casualties, and anybody else present at that scene. They are expecting us to be doing something. Assessment is the next important thing. So we need to take stock. What can we see around us? What are people telling us? What is control telling us that they know? and we're going to start to build a mental picture of what's going on at that scene. But we need to be really conscious that our mental picture, our understanding, and even if that is a shared understanding, a shared mental model, might not be true. There might be things that we discover that don't fit with our mental model. And we need to be really guarded against conformity bias. We need to be really guarded about, yeah, but that's probably nothing because I've already called it this type of incident. Actually, what we need to be doing is thinking, hang on, I'm saying that because I want it to be true. No, this is challenging my mental model. My mental model is probably not correct. And going back to that assessment and looking at that again. We then triage our patients. So initially that's going to be a triage sieve, and we're going to look at that. We'll then do a triage sort later on. Once we've triaged our casualties, then we start providing treatment, and then we do the transportation. Now, this is a little bit backwards to what people expect. People think we turn up in a uniform with a bit of green here, a bit of green there, your paramedic slapped on the back and a big yellow bus outside that says ambulance down it. Everybody thinks, right, great, we're going to put the casualties on and we're going to treat them, we'll get them off to hospital. Actually, they are the last two things we're going to do. And that goes right back up to where we said communication, because we need to communicate and explain to everybody why we're not rushing in with that treatment and transport. We need to manage the expectations, and those expectations don't just come from the public, but they come from other agencies as well. But before we've got there, we've got zero responders. Now, a zero responder could be any number of things. Now, I'm just going to throw a quick poll up again. And what do you think members of the crowd, so people involved in the incident, what do you think they will do when an incident happens right there and they're involved in it, or it's right next to them and they have a decision? Do I get involved? Do I not get involved? Do I help, or do I get away in case I get hurt? What do people think? You can answer more than one here. It's absolutely fine. And the third of you that have voted so far have answered exactly how I thought you were going to answer. Okay, fantastic. We're just going to share those results with you because I think it's quite useful for responders to be able to actually see what we all think is happening here. And you all, 75% of you said that a crowd is going to panic. Next was 54% of you. There's going to be that feeling of shock. There's going to be that feeling of disbelief almost, you know, not actually able to take in what's happening. 38% of you said people are going to be selfish. Me first, I want to get out. I don't want to get hurt. I'm injured. I need help. That kind of attitude. 32% of you think people are going to cooperate. 31% of you think people will give some kind of instructions or take charge. And 23% of you believe that our crowd is going to be apathetic. They're not particularly going to care what's happening around them. But let's look at that, because we have this concept of zero responders. And zero responders really came to the fore after the Kerslake review. But they came in a lot earlier than that, and they started to be looked at after 7/7 in 2005. Professor John Drury from the University of Sussex delivered a fantastic webinar on that, which ProMed admin team is going to send you a link to. What a zero responder is and how crowds actually do react. So a zero responder, let's just pop something in the chat. What do you think a zero responder is? Give me any words to describe who you think is going to be your zero responders. So somebody with no kit. Very good, Jack. Bystanders. Well done, Mick. The public. Jesse, absolutely right. Elaine, off-duty nurses. They could be. And my admin team is a nurse. She's celebrating. Matthew Dennis, untrained person, no equipment. Cat Tree, off-duty emergency services. William, people will take initiative. Paras, uninjured bystanders. Pam, Ian, anybody. Adam, people with no training and no kit. Martin, possible HCPs at the scene who just happened to be curtains. Madison, somebody present. Neil, event staff. Yes, your non-medical event staff. So, absolutely, at the time the incident takes place, a zero responder is by definition, usually, a member of the public. But they could also be employees who have first aid at work training. So the Manchester Arena highlighted that some of those people were show set crowd stewards. So they're not necessarily there for the purposes of providing first aid, but they are there for crowd management, and some of them will have done a first aid qualification. Likewise, it was above Manchester Victoria Station where a number of Northern Rail staff are first aid at work trained. So first aid at work, as I'm sure many of us recognise, is not an appropriate qualification for providing medical care at events. And on your first aid at work course, if any of you have done any recently, you'll know that at no point do you cover things like marauding terrorist firearms attacks, bombs, explosions, catastrophic hemorrhages, and those kind of things. They're just not what first aid at work is for, because in the majority of low to medium risk workplaces, those kind of things simply don't happen. But actually, some of the casualties that arise from those incidents can be dealt with perfectly confidently by somebody who has first aid at work. Now, zero responders come together with what Professor Drury called a shared social identity. And it was noted by Professor Drury and some colleagues that they're more likely to have this shared social identity if there is availability of first aid kits, or if the public at large have had some kind of basic first aid training. And what this shared social identity is it's where everybody's together. So they've all been part of this incident, and they all have some sort of unity with everybody else around them who's also been affected by this incident. And it leads to an increase in cooperation because everybody all of a sudden is in the same boat. Everybody needs help. Everybody is in some way affected by it. So they come together and they cooperate because they kind of, it's almost intuitive that you know, to get the best out of this, you're going to need to work with the people around you. And that was something really key in 7/7, in that those people in the tube carriages, being so far underground, realized they would have to work together, because if they went out into the dark on their own, into tunnels with possibly electrified rails, they probably weren't going to get very far. Whereas by staying together and cooperating with one another, they were more likely to survive overall. A zero responder, in simple forms, is any spontaneous helper. And mass panic is a myth. So the 3/4 of you who said that our crowd was going to panic, you are wrong. Professor Drury and his colleagues have dispelled this several times. People do not scream, stampede, run around like headless chickens in an incident. At no incident in recent times in the UK have we seen this behaviour from an overall crowd. Yes, one or two people may, in their shock, try to run away, or in shock may scream because they're struggling to emotionally process what is in front of them, but they're not panicking in the true sense of the word panic. And the other thing that zero responders are really good at doing is evacuating casualties from the scene to safety. Now, that could be themselves as P3s, that could be other people who, for whatever reason, are immobile. That might be they're trapped and some zero responders lift that beam or that brickwork off them. It might be that they go and grab an advertising board and ferry them away to safety, as happened in Hillsborough in 1989. And all of this is actually really important, because with the best will in the world, and I mean the absolute best will in the world, it is important to remember that no matter how efficient, how well rehearsed, and how well managed our response is, even if we were expecting something to happen, even if we knew at 10:30 on Thursday night a bomb is going to go off in the Orient in the Trafford Centre, you can guarantee that it will still take time for professional responders to get there. It is impossible for them to be at the scene instantaneously. They need to be called, usually by 999. They then need to be dispatched or diverted. They need to make their way to the incident site, remembering that there's going to be a large pedestrian crowd, there's potentially going to be congested traffic, and they then need to plan to enter those potentially dangerous environments without putting their own lives in danger and without becoming a casualty themselves. Now, to highlight that, the quickest response time I have seen for the ambulance service to a major incident was Kerslake. 11 minutes for an advanced paramedic who was close enough to hear the blast themselves, get kitted up, get in their car, blue light to scene, get out of the car, make an assessment, check they have the correct PPE on, and walk into the foyer. It took 11 minutes for that to happen, and they were close enough to hear it happen. It took 18 minutes for the 12 double crewed ambulances, so 24 more staff, your full command structure, and then some, to be in place. So essentially for 18 minutes, those zero responders were the chance of survival for your P1 and possibly some of your P2 casualties. They were the reassurance that those injured people needed. They were doing your job for you. And that's important, and we need to recognize that. We need to plan for that, and we need to enable that shared social identity to take place. So as I mentioned, things that improve a shared social identity is the availability of first aid kits, basic training. So when I plan larger events, when I'm looking at multiple stage events, when I'm looking at events spread out over a large area, I position kit dumps, so a defib and a bag full of general dressings and trauma. Possibly I might put a carry chair, I might put a scoop, I might put oxygen, other little bits, but fundamentally a defib and a bag with dressings and trauma stuff. They don't necessarily have to have a first aid. I stood next to them. I can leave them next to a security or stewarding checkpoint. As long as somebody is there so that they don't go for a walk, they can be left. And then if we ever do have this kind of situation, those zero responders can go and get it. As a company owner, am I particularly bothered if £500 worth of kit gets used on patients in a major incident? Absolutely not. That's what we're there for. That's what we want to happen. Am I particularly bothered if Joe Public, who has never done any day's first aid training in his life, opens that bag, sees some blast dressings, sees a person heavily bleeding, and just opens them and stuffs them in? No, I'm not, because they're doing their best to help in that 11 to 18 minutes, while we're just not even able to get there with the best will in the world. And then we need to remember that doing nothing absolutely will lead to a loss of lives. And thinking about the fact that there is this huge resource that is going to be in place at any incident is something that really we need to be looking at changing our thinking on. Of course, if we're the zero responder, if we happen to be in town or in the shops or at the football match as a spectator and something happens, what can we do? We need to be that voice. We need to start communicating. We need to reassure people help is being arranged. I can see people on the phone to the emergency services. They will be here in 10 to 15 minutes time. Make sure that you are giving absolutely correct information. Don't say the emergency services will be here in 2 minutes, they're just around the corner. Be realistic with those expectations, because then people will understand, actually, yes, this takes time. Start giving direction. I want you to go outside and any taxis, tell them to disappear. I want you to, those people who are walking, I want you to ask them to go over there. Those people who are clearly bleeding but walking, send them over there, please. Can you go to the bar and get me some bottles of water? Give people jobs that you think are going to be worthwhile. And somebody's mentioned give an accurate methane report, which is exactly the next slide. So once we've got people doing what we're doing, and probably at the same time, we're going to treble mine it on our own phones, and we are going to ask for the ambulance service. And when that call is answered with the line, ambulance service, is the patient alert? We are going to say, I am declaring a major incident. Are you ready for my methane report? And we are going to repeat, I am declaring a major incident. Are you ready for my methane report? Until they stop asking us, is the patient fully alert? They will, at some point, remember their training, and they will click and go, shit, this is not normal. This is serious time. I need my supervisor. So, are we declaring the major incident, or are we just putting them on standby? That's the first thing that we do in that initial phone call. Now, there are also other words we can use. So we can say major incident stop. That means we still have a major incident ongoing, a bit confusing there, but stop sending more resources because there's now more than enough resources at the scene to manage. We've contained it, we have compensated this incident. Everybody else can now go back to business as usual because let's not forget, business as usual hasn't magically evaporated. That is still ongoing in our area, in our event, in our city. And realistically, once we get to the point where we've got enough resources on scene, if we get more, they're going to get in the way because they're not going to fulfill a useful role. We can also say major incident stand down. That is at the end of the incident, we have now done all the jobs that we need to do as our particular service. So the ambulance service standing down is not necessarily when the police will stand down. The event medical provider standing down their major incident response will possibly happen before the ambulance service does, because they may need to go back to BAU for the event. We can also say major incident cancel. So if we've done a major incident standby, and then we find out that all of the casualties are actually dead, or it's just a large number of P3s that we're going to be able to contain and compensate without too much extra resource, we can cancel that major incident. And the other declaration within health service is major incident, scene evacuation complete. So what that means is the last live casualty known at that moment in time has been removed from the scene to a place of definitive treatment. That's not to say it's always going to be the case, because fire, bless them, might well find a patient we didn't know about 10 minutes later, in which case we'll have to retract that. But majority of cases at that moment in time is the overall. The E stands for exact location. Now this again comes with forward planning. For the event medical providers, your forward planning here is absolutely critical. Do you use what 3 words in your operational plans? Do your staff briefing documents have what 3 words in there for the location of your event field? Because your postcode could be a mile down the road. Your street name could be 3 miles long. If you're in a city centre, do you know the street name? And are you even on a street? Do you even have a postal address? What if you have a railway accident? And this was the case in Ladbroke Grove in 1999. I do know one of the call handlers who took a call there. And essentially what happened for not just them, but for other call handlers, they got a little bit stuck in the loop because they were following the protocol in front of them. Tell me the address of the emergency. Where do I need to send the ambulance? And really importantly, the person on the train, the people who had mobile phones on the train, didn't know. I'm 5 minutes out of Paddington. I'm on a 3-carriage train. I've not got the Greenford yet. There's a whole load of smoke and fire. Can you not see it? And the call handlers were, well, can you go to a street? Can you look for a street sign and give me a street name? And then there was this total lack of understanding of each other's role. So the call handler was unable to visualize that this was a 4-track mainline railway with steep embankments that people couldn't get away from. And the people on the train were unable to understand that 10 mile away in the centre of London, they couldn't look out and see this fireball because there was all these other buildings in the way. And it just became a little bit tricky. I mean, nowadays, of course, we have Google Maps, we have what 3 words, we can go on Street View, but doing that in an incident is a little bit time consuming. If we're planning our events, we want to be getting this early. Now, I just want to jump on a question from Allied Medical Solutions. No, it's not our responsibility as an individual to say stop. It is the silver commander, whoever that may be, to say major incident stop. But ultimately, we could be in a position where we're looking at thinking, right, okay, I've actually got another 2 teams of people. But if we hear that, we know that actually, no, those 2 teams of people can now have their break or can now deal with business as usual. We don't need to keep sending to that resource. So that decision is always made by the relevant silver commander for that particular service. So the type of incident is really key. So is it an MTFA? Is it a fire? Is it an earthquake? Is it a structural collapse? Is it a crowd crush from a barrier collapse? Is it just a few gunshots? Is it a train disaster? Is it a petrochemical incident? So we need to know what that incident is. We don't need to know exact. It's a rough kind of idea. Well done, Connor. Really pleased to see what 3 words is being used there. Hazards present and suspected. So this is not go out and do a risk assessment and look at every possible square inch of the incident. This is, I'm stood here, I can see that bridge over there looks a little bit peaky. I can see we've got a main road over there and that's still got traffic flying by at 40 miles an hour. I can see at least 4,000 people involved in this incident. It's what you can see, it's what you can reasonably assume from where you stood. As time goes on, and you're getting more information, that shared understanding the risk emerges, then that line is going to get more and more populated. We've then got access. So what are the safe routes to the event? Again, if you're planning an event, what 3 words, all of your RVPs? Full street address and postcode, all of your RVPs. If you're not in a typical addressable place, if you're on a riverside, where are all the points where roads come close to that river that are going to give you that safe route, that access? If you do come to an incident, look around you. Where is currently clear? Dispatch a couple of people to stop anything coming down that don't have blue flashy lights on it, and give yourself that safe route and tell people, tell the call handler, your access is on Smithson Street. There's 2 people, not letting anybody on Smithson Street unless they're an emergency services vehicle. And that will just help get everybody where they need to be. We need to know the number, the type, and the severity of casualties. Now, in the initial phase, you're going to say, I don't know. You're going to say, I can see a lot of people walking with injuries. From where I'm standing, it looks like people might be trapped. You do not need to be any more specific on that point. 5-10 minutes into the incident, maybe 20 minutes into the incident, once you've got sufficient resources and you have a triage officer and they have people under them performing the triage and reporting back to them and reporting up to Silver, then we're going to start to get a bit more of a handle on the number, the type, and the severity of casualties. And then we're going to update control and we're going to give a full methane report again with all the updated information. The type of casualties is really important. Are they pediatric? Are they burns? Are they head injuries? Because the types of hospital that get placed on standby, your nearest hospital, absolutely. Your nearest major trauma centre and trauma units, probably. But actually, if it's a fire and you're looking at a lot of burns people, is there a burns unit in your local area? Or is the ambulance service going to start ringing the National Burns Coordination Centre to let them know that in the next 12 hours, they're going to have a lot of casualties to handle? If it's PEDS, your local major trauma centre or trauma unit might not be PEDS specialist. So they're going to then go and pre-alert the hospitals that do handle PEDS, which might well be further away. So that nature makes a big difference. And as Marie-Louise is saying, advanced medical teams can be activated depending on what you're telling them. And that comes onto the emergency services present and required. So what is currently around you? So that might be, there's no emergency services yet. I'm an off-duty paramedic, I'm an off-duty police officer, but nobody else is here. What's required? So do I require the police? Do I require, police who can do crowd control? Do I require police with guns because actually there's a guy running around with a gun? Do I require fire? Do I require lots of fire? Do I require fire with really big ladders? Do I require fire with lots of hose? Be a little bit more specific if you can, but if you can't, just say, I need a lot of fire, and you'll get it. In terms of ambulance, we should all know our ambulance service capabilities. I need heart. I need special operations team. I need heart in ballistics. We're going to need heli meds. There's a flat area about a quarter of a mile away they can land on. Get that information out there. If you know your ideas, if you know lives for Lincolnshire or basics for a lot of the rest of the country, I'm going to need medical teams to see, and I'm going to need doctors. Get that information in there, because remember, everything takes a bit of time to mobilise to location. Marie-Louise made a really good point. Heart can take a lot of time. There are some areas where I know I can have the full ambulance service trust complement of heart in front of me within 20 minutes. There are also other areas on that same trusts patch where I know I'm going to be lucky to see 2 heart vehicles inside 45 minutes. And that, you know, that early activation, that early warning, do you know what? They get halfway there and they get stood down. So what? They get halfway there and actually we really need them. Well, at least they're already halfway there instead of for the first time going, we really need their skills and they're still 45 minutes down the road. Armed police do take a lot of time depending on where you are. Again, I do a lot of work in city centres. I generally know I will have at least 2 ARUs within 2 or 3 minutes. But I also work in the countryside on some sort of not too big events, but again, events that could be a threat. And I know that I'm looking at 20, 30 minutes for that resource as well. So the more specific you can be, they will get activated. They might well get activated on a standby, but chances are wheels will still be rolling. Once somebody from that service gets there and confirms it, at least their wheels have already been turning, or at least they're already in the car. And I'm just going to stress, every time you get new information, you're going to repeat the full methane from the beginning. Now, the reason why it's M/ETHANE is because the exact location through the emergency services present required is actually a really useful model for any time that you are requesting assistance from any other emergency service, because that is all the information that they're going to need to know right there. So even if you're not using a major incident, let's get into the habit of professionals of using that ETHANE mnemonic to communicate. Now, for those of you who downloaded the Jessup app, you will find that there is a methane section. It will formulate your report. You can also then share that via WhatsApp, via text message. Yes, you can send text messages to 999 if you have already registered. Search on YouTube if you don't know how to. The next kind of little mnemonic that we're going to go into is II March. And this is basically from Jessup, and it is the briefing handover format we use for face-to-face communications. So that's the information. So where is something happening, what is happening, and that methane report we've just done. The intent. So why are we doing what we're doing, and what strategy, tactics, and operations do we have to do that? The method. So how are we going to take that strategy, that tactic, and that operation, and how are we going to have a plan? What's the plan to deliver the intent? The administration is all that stuff that happens in the background. Who's the commander? Who's the forward incident officer? Who's the equipment officer? Who's dealing with media, or what is the policy? Where are we going to put media? Logging, so who's got logists, who needs to log things themselves? Welfare, how are we looking after our staff? Do we need to arrange relief crews? Is there somewhere we can use to get brews? Risk assessment, so that just jumps back to the hazards from methane. What threats do we have, and is everybody wearing the correct PPE before we let them into the scene? So communications, radios, are we on airwave? Are we on fireground UHF? Are we on event VHF, UHF? What radios are we using? What call signs are people having? Any other communication methods? What phone numbers do we have in place? And interagency, how are we communicating as a medical provider with the event security provider? How are we communicating with the county fire and rescue service? How is that interagency dialogue going to happen? And then the humanitarian issues. For medical, that is mainly around disclosure. For police, that's around things like human rights. And again, if you've got the Jessup app, you can formulate your II March briefing in the Jessup app and update it. So now we've got the tools, what are we going to do as the first crew on scene? So we're going to throw up a little poll. What do you think that you should do if you're the first crew on scene? As many options as you think apply. Are you going to start treating every casualty you encounter? Are you going to provide a windscreen report before leaving your vehicle? Are you going to go straight into that scene and triage everybody? Are you going to update control with a methane report as soon as possible? Are you going to call 999 and ask for the police? Okay, 2/3 of you have now voted, which is absolutely excellent. I'm just going to give the last few of you another few seconds there. And let's just end it there. So 87% of you said that you're going to update control with a methane report as soon as possible. Absolutely bang on. Before we do that, 66% of you said we're going to provide a windscreen report before leaving your vehicle. That is, again, perfect. So you arrive, you ring through, radio through, what is in front of your eyes. Once you've done that, you've gone out, you've had a look around, then you're in control with that updated methane. All of the other things were not what you're going to do as the first crew on scene. I am very pleased that nobody said they were going to start treating any casualties. Well done, every single one of you, for not selecting that. We're not going into the scene to triage everybody, because by de facto, we're the incident commander. Now, there is something I'm going to say about King's Cross there. Calling 999 and asking for the police, I can see where 13% of you are coming from. If I'd said call 999, ask for fire, I'd absolutely agree. But we're going to call our own service. We're going to make that. We're going to use our radio, and we're going to go through our own communication channels. And we are going to, and I know assumptions not always great, but we are going to have to assume that our command and control structure that is in normal operation knows how to escalate and inform other agencies. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to commence a systematic process of scene assessment and management. So we are going to start looking around us, and we're going to be very deliberate. We are going to look at, right, what's happening over there? What's happening over here? What's happening over here? What are those people doing? What are those people doing? We're going to be very deliberate, very thorough and systematic in our assessment, but simultaneously, we're also going to start managing that scene. So if you can walk, go over there. If you can walk, but you're injured, go over there. So we're going to start managing that scene. We're going to start thinning it out. Absolutely, Marie, get the police to call for us. We're going to start giving out a few little jobs. We're going to coordinate the triage and evacuation process effectively. Now, the key word in that sentence is coordinate. So we are going to be overseeing it. We are going to perhaps start directing somebody to do it if we've got a trained resource available for the triage. We're going to start getting people to direct the evacuation process, but we're standing back. We are overseeing, we are coordinating, we're not doing. We are constantly assessing and managing the broader risks. We are thinking, this is bad, but a lot worse could still be yet to come. What are those a lot worse things? What is that totally inconceivable? My mind is blown, this could never happen. But actually, I'm going to think, you know what, it might happen, and I'm going to make sure that I'm managing that possibility. Connor, from event medical point of view, staff to an RVP so they know what happened. Absolutely, you know, make sure everybody knows what their role is, and it is not to rush in. Marie, keep our bandwidth wide to see everything. That is absolutely it. We need to be taking a step back. We need to be that crew that realistically don't go more than 10 steps away from our vehicle. We need to be the ones that just stay away and watch everything that's going on until such a time that we can hand over to an appropriately senior officer. Now, that is probably not going to be the first yellow truck with blue flashing lights. They might well be double ECS. For all you know, they're an advanced paramedic and they're having a check drive with a senior paramedic officer. Great if they are, but in the majority of cases, that first vehicle to arrive is not going to be an appropriately senior officer, and there is little to no value in handing over at that point. Mick Murphy, I wouldn't start triage until resources have been sent to me as they need a local point of liaison before heading in. Yeah, absolutely. We don't start triage until we actually have resources who have been briefed. Nobody goes to that scene until they've been briefed. Under no circumstances should the first crew on scene become involved in casualty treatment. You already know that. And the other thing to make you aware of is your actions. You turn up in uniform, you are the first people that these injured people, these caught bystanders see. You're going to be the focus of their attention. So the initial actions you take and any decisions that you make are going to be judged during any subsequent inquiry. So actually, one of the more important things you could do is get yourself a pen and a piece of paper, even if you have to get that off somebody else. But the good news is that it's going to be framed in the context of knowledge that should have been known or was readily available at the time. So you've all attended this, so you know to take that step back and look around you. But you could be somebody who is a FREC 3 and has done no formal major incident training and is literally just looking in front of you and seeing a fire. And that's how you're going to be looked at. What was reasonably expected of you? Well, he knew there was a fire. He's done a little 1 hour session. And actually all he did was tell people not to go in and told people who were injured to go to one place. He did the best he could with the knowledge that was available. If you've done more training, more might well be expected of you. And the point that I'm saying about handing over here comes from the King's Cross fire. It's chapter 11 in the report if you want to read it. In the first 59 minutes of that incident, there were 5 fire officers who all had the fire silver role. In 1942, their first crew on scene, the most senior person in that crew, took command. Absolutely right. But that senior officer, having taken command, then went into the scene without communication, without sufficient PPE, etc., and the incident engulfed that commander. So in 1945, there was actually no commander 3 minutes into this incident. Nobody on the surface was aware of that, and the remaining senior staff, well, relatively senior staff, were not present with their pumps. They were not easily able to be found. When at 1949, an appropriately senior officer did arrive and take command. And he was not too bad. He had command for a nice 23 minutes, which is a reasonable length of time for an initial person taking command to have command for. You can gather all of your information. You can brief your first few people into what you need them to do. You can start gathering everybody together. However, at 2012, the officer who took over was in command for no more than 3 minutes. And in that time, I honestly do not see how we can have received and then given a handover. In 3 minutes, that would have been impossible. And that was actually repeated at Grenfell when I believe it was down to 2 minutes for an officer to have command. Less so does this happen in the ambulance service, for a lot more switched on, but it is something that I have seen happen at significant incidents where an event medical provider will see an ambulance crew from the NHS and they will hand over to them, who will effectively be in command for no greater than 5 minutes, and then ambulance silver as then is, then goes back to the event medical manager and says, tell me what I need to know. But I'm not in command. Yes, but tell me what I need to know because this is your event. So it's just think about that context and think about continuity of command and think about how much information can be lost or misinterpreted in a handover process. And as Mick has correctly pointed out, you are silver until you are taken over by someone who can and should be silver. So Marie, you've been the lower qualified first on scene, 2 paras arrived. What do you need them to do? They've gone to do the triage and left you commanding. Absolutely correct. That is what they should be doing, because once you've got command and communication, your next priority is going to be that triage. You need to know what's going on. And there was no point in them taking over from you and wasting time in a handover and having less awareness than you will have innately picked up, and you going into triage when actually you staying on the outside to brief the appropriately senior officer, 100% the right thing to do. So we're now going to very briefly touch on the triage sieve and triage sort. So you will recognize this diagram up on the right-hand side, which is from the National Ambulance Resilience Unit. And triage needs to be applied to every person who was involved in the incident. And that's because of this question here. Are they injured? If they are not injured, they need to go to the Survivor Reception Centre and be accounted for. If they are injured, we then go down this pathway, which leads to all of these boxes down here, which gives them a categorization. So every single person gets triaged. We might not formally get out our laminate and look at what we're doing, but we are still triaging them, even if it's just a quick eyes, you're not injured. Labeling is absolutely vital. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen the smart DNet tags. I'm sure some of you have seen the tear-off tags and all the other varieties. You know, other varieties are available from several reputable retailers. I'm sure we've all heard that line. It doesn't matter what you use. On a small event with 2 first aiders, do I provide a smart pack of 20 tags? No. What I generally have is a Sharpie or a marker pen All I need to do, 1, 2, 3. All I'm doing is putting a number on that person. I know you have been triaged. If that person is injured, I will then put priority on them as well. But all I need to know is you've been triaged. You're not going to get double counted because I have labelled the fact that you have been triaged. At some point, we're going to start recording those labels and start managing the process. But that is a whole topic in itself, and we're planning a webinar on it. We are, however, going to keep a tally and report regularly. So we're just going to get a scrap of paper at the back of our own hand. Survivor 1, 2, 3 dead, and we're just going to quickly scribble a little tally so that we know how many survivors, how many walking, how many P1s and 2s, how many we came across that we've already triaged to be dead. Now I'm saying triaged to be dead. We've not recognised that they're life extinct. We have triaged them as dead, and that is quite different. Any intervention we make, we are going to re-triage them, and some of those interventions are actually on here. So catastrophic hemorrhage, apply tourniquet and hemostatic dressing, they become a priority 1. Because actually, if we don't intervene, we'll re-triage them 2 minutes later and they will meet the criteria for dead. Likewise, airway open, breathing, no is dead. Because if we don't open the airway, they may well not be breathing because of an airway obstruction, their tongue might be in the way. So it's really simple interventions on that first wave. But then as we go back and we start to treat those P1s, we're then going to re-triage them. So actually, their rest rate was a little bit high when we first re-triaged them, or they were a little bit low, and we bagged them and it's gone up. They're now down to a P2. So every time we do an intervention, they need to be re-triaged. Now, this particular protocol is not suitable for pediatric patients without modification. Now, a little bit more specifically, it's not suitable for large numbers of pediatric patients without modification. So child physiological parameters is that their rest rate is naturally higher than an adult. Their heart rate is naturally higher than an adult. Cap refills usually are the same, but it leads to over triage. Now, if you're an incident with a typical makeup, not too many families or kids, is it a bad thing that we're over triaging patients and we're priority 1 to get them away from the scene? Not necessarily, because of the mental health and emotional trauma that is going to be present from being part of the incident for young children. But if we've had a school bus crash, every patient is probably going to come out as a P1. So we're going to use a pediatric triage tape. Most reputable kits do come with them, and you literally open it up, lay it next to the patient. Where do your feet end up? They're the parameters I'm going to use. That's the colour I'm going to give you. Away you go. Absolutely, Kerry. We're going to use members of the public. We're going to use our zero responders to, put that pressure on. Yeah, really easy. Press hard. Absolutely. Hold, I've got them in the recovery position. Just make sure their head stays open. Lovely jubbly. Exactly like that. Nice and quick. Yep. If you see people who are moderately bleeding and you've got some dressings to hand, yep, there's a dressing. Stick it on. I'll come back and we'll tighten it up properly. So triage sort is a lot more invested. It's a lot more involved. So we don't do this at scene straight away. This is something that we bring in a little bit later on. Now, what we use in the UK is the Triage Revised Trauma Score, or TRTS, as you may have heard of it. And there are certain key times that we absolutely do this, but once primary triages are complete and we have sufficient resources, we'll probably move to start using triage sort over triage sieve because we have enough resources to be able to carry this out. Now, a total score of less than 3 is the expectant category if it is invoked, and a total score of 0 is dead. If you've got a rest rate of 0, you're dead. If you've got a systolic blood pressure of 0, you're dead. In the context of this, if you have both of those and a GCS of 3, you're dead. If your GCS is above that, you're expectant, because we all know if you're not breathing with no systolic blood pressure, you're on the way out. So we will always do a triage sort on arrival to the casualty clearing station. We will do this again in the casualty clearing station, but we're going to supplement that with the doctors who are going to look at the anatomical information and perhaps adjust upwards or downwards based on their clinical experience. We're going to do it again on departure from the CCS with the information that's available, and that's going to be done again at a hospital. Now, just going to throw up a quick poll, so make sure you can still see your triage sort. and we've got some patients, and I would like you to score what triage priority they are. So our first patient is a 9-year-old female who is found lying on the ground. And sorry, can you do the next one, please, then? I'm just going to end that. Okay, so triage sieve. Here we go. And there we go. So patient number 1, on arrival to the CCS, is breathing normally with a palpable radial pulse and a GCS of 11. So what priority would we say they are from triage short? Patient number 2 arrives at the CCS hyperventilating, so we can take that as meaning 30 or higher, with a systolic blood pressure of 84 and a GCS of 12. And our third patient arrives at the CCS with a respiratory rate of 7, systolic blood pressure of 100, and a GCS of 3. So what priority would they be? So this might take a few seconds, so I'll just give you a little bit of time to do that. Okay, so a total score of less than 10 is a priority 1, a total score of 11 is priority 2, and a total score of 12, which is our best possible score, will be priority 3. So really pleased to see that 2/5 of you have voted. So our first patient is normal breathing. So we're going to assume that means 10 to 29 and give them a score of 4. They've got a palpable radial pulse, which for those who are clinically qualified will be aware that that usually means a systolic blood pressure over 90. So we're going to give them a score of 4 as well. They've got a GCS of 11, which is therefore between 9 and 12, and that gives us a score of 3. So 4 add 3 is 11, which gives us priority 2. So well done to the 62% of you who got that right. Our second patient arrived in the CCS hyperventilating. So that is above 29, which is a score of 3. And a systolic blood pressure of 84, that's between 76 and 89, so that gets a score of 3 as well. And a GCS of 12, which is between 9 and 12, giving us a score of 3. So 3 add 3 being 9. That score is less than 10, which is priority 1. So well done to the 49% of you who got that. And our patient with a respiratory rate of 7 is between 6 and 9, so that's 2. A systolic blood pressure of 100, which is above 90, so that's 4, so up to 6 there. And a GCS of 3 is 0, so we're staying at 6, still less than 10, so that is priority 1. So well done for everybody for having a go. You can see a lot of you are really trying there. And you can see by the situation I put you in there, not necessarily having full time to consider this, it wasn't something you could do readily. And this is why we don't use triage, the triage revised trauma score in the field, because it is something that takes a bit of time, a bit of thinking, and reference to that little chart, which would be available in those scenarios. And the last thing that we need to look at is the treatment and transport, which is the final part of our CS CAT. So we've got the command, the safety, the communication, the assessment, we've triaged everybody. And now we're going to do triage, the treatment and transport. The problem we've got is this is going against the expectations of the public and other agencies. Now, Kerslake report highlighted that the perception of members of the public and other responding agencies was that the operation of the casualty clearing station actively slowed down the evacuation of casualties to hospital. That's what they saw happening. They saw this queue of ambulances on the approach to Victoria Station, and all empty with no casualties in them, and yet you walked onto the station concourse and there laid out in front of them was all manner of casualties with all range of injuries, and all these ambulance people just milling around, quote, doing nothing. That's what everybody saw, whether you're a police officer, whether you're a member of the public, whether you were Network Rail, that's what you saw. You didn't, you know, those people don't have an understanding of what we do. However, the other thing Kerslake pointed out is what this actually does. And it gives us the opportunity, it gives our receiving hospitals the time to activate their major incident plans. So it might be that people need to be called in from home, so they're going to need to drive in. We need to get that A&E waiting room cleared. We need to get patients out of the ED, off to home or into the ward. It ensures that patients are directed to the appropriate specialist facilities, thereby reducing the need for secondary transfers. What we don't want is all of our patients going to the nearest district general hospital A&E with all manner of neurological, closed box head injuries, serious burns, 20 paediatric patients when this hospital doesn't even have a paediatric ED and never does paediatric surgery, and major traumas that need orthopedic stabilisation, which this hospital doesn't do. Because all that's going to result in is our ambulances being tied up for another 5 or 6 hours, moving all of those patients to where they should have gone in the first place. And absolutely, the right patient getting the right treatment in the right time at the right location. The other good point is sending P3s to hospital clogs up the emergency department. We can't always control this because the nature of a P3 is that a P3 is a mobile walking casualty. So they may well get the bus, the taxi, the tram, the train, their legs to the nearest ED. And in actual fact, a lot of ambulance services in their major incident planning deliberately say that they will place the second nearest hospital as the designated receiving hospital, but they will major incident activate the nearest hospital to deal with those P3s. But they will transport to the second nearest. Therefore, you don't have that problem of competing patients, if you will. And what's really key here for us as event medical providers and personnel who engage with other emergency services and other agencies on a regular and routine basis is we have the power to educate and inform all of those agencies that what we're doing is not slowing down taking casualties to hospital, but we're stabilizing those casualties. They need to survive the journey to hospital because otherwise we may as well take them to the undertakers. And that is a harsh reality. We can't transport somebody who isn't going to make the 10-minute journey. They need to be stabilized. Hospitals need to be prepared. We need to do that triage because we need to effectively utilize those resources. Yes, I can see there's 12 ambulances outside. That's great, but I've got 40 casualties in here. So by keeping those 24 paramedics on the floor, those 40 patients are more likely to survive than if I send 24 members of staff with 12 patients, and that still leaves me with 28 patients who might well die. We've got to utilize the resources effectively, and people, if we've got the opportunity to educate people and say, if the shit hits the fan, what we're going to do is probably not what you think we do all the time. And it's actually very different to our normal day-to-day procedures. But what we're doing is we're saving more lives by doing this. And the reason is, and as I've said, we're going to get people to the right place because we want people to survive, not just getting off our concourse or off our field. We want people to survive and lead a full and happy life until, natural causes in their, octo nonagenarian or whatever they happen to be. So thank you all very much for staying and enjoying the webinar. We are going to be doing a Q&A session in a moment. If you would like to see PD certificate from tonight, please can you send an email to webinars@promed999.co.uk with your full name. We do have a list of everybody who has attended tonight, so we will be verifying that you're in the session throughout. Your e-certificates are going to be in digital form only, and we will email them within 3 business days. Now, as we've said, we are providing these free of charge, and we hope that you have enjoyed and benefited from them. We would like to ask that you leave us at least 1 review. We're not going to be bold and say, give us a great review or give us a 5-star review. What we're going to say is, please leave us a review. Be honest, tell us what you think about tonight's session. If you think we can improve, absolutely tell us how we can make this better for you. Those review sites will be Trustpilot, Yelp, Google, and Facebook. So the other thing is, we are going to make this available on YouTube. So if you want to catch up, or if you've got any friends who missed it and would like to watch it, our YouTube channel has just been posted in the chat, I believe, by ProMed admin. So thank you very much for doing that. We will, if you email us your name for the certificate, we will also send you an email once we've posted the video up so you can share that and use that yourself. So we're now going to open the floor for questions. So if you click on the participants panel in Zoom, you will have the option to, if you look at the bottom of Zoom, I think, or in the participants panel, one of the two, you will have the option to raise your hand and ask a question. If you do raise your hand and you would like to ask a question verbally, we will send you a request to unmute yourself and you can ask your question in person. We would love to see that. It's nice to see people's faces rather than just mine. I know what I look like. Just saying, don't really need that. And let's make a start. Alternatively, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. And we just have our final poll there. If you can just quickly give us a rating of how you found tonight, and would you recommend ProMed based on tonight to any friends or colleagues? So far, there we go, nearly half of you have done that. I'm absolutely really impressed that so many of you have stayed until the end on our first webinar. And I'm really pleased that most of you are satisfied or found this excellent. That's absolutely fantastic. So while that's going on, our first question I can see is from Neil O'Gorman. Neil, if you'd like to ask your question, feel free to unmute yourself. If not, feel free to type anything into the chat. Everybody who's saying thank you, you're all very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure presenting for you tonight. Paras, question from you. I'm going to give you permission to unmute yourself there. Hi, Paras. What's your question? I'm afraid I can't hear you, Paras. You are unmuted, but I can't hear you. Okay, so have we looked into the psychological impact of major incidents and how we may begin to support individuals suffering? No, we haven't. I've got to be completely honest. I'm just going to ask admin team to make sure we save that question, because that is actually something that I would like to do some research into now you've mentioned it, and perhaps we could run a future webinar. If it's something that you're experiencing, please just email us webinars@promed999.co.uk, because it is something we'd like to take forward and deliver another webinar on, which is fantastic. Mick, thank you. That's great. If you could email me a link to that, that would be fantastic. Our next question is from Teddy. I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself there if you'd like to ask it. Teddy, would you like to unmute yourself, or do you want to ask your question in the chat? Okay, Duncan, hello. Do you have a question?
The question I had was where an incident exceeds the event criteria for a major incident, so the number of casualties exceeds your capability on site or the severity, but you may only need perhaps one additional ambulance, for example, from the trust. Would you still communicate with them as declaring a major incident via methane to the trust control?
So if it only needs one additional ambulance from trust and you're still confident that you've got a business as usual capacity to run the rest of the site, then that's not necessarily meeting the health service definition as far as the NHS goes. But you've also got to consider, if you're using your ambulances to send patients to hospital, that hospital might need to be placed on major incident standby if they're going to receive a significant volume. And that in itself might have a knock-on effect with the trust in terms of that hospital not being able to receive as many casualties from them. So it's certainly a conversation. Certainly when you're calling that in, you might say, my staff on site are treating this as a major incident, but from you, and then go through ETHANE, and when it says emergency services required, from the NHS ambulance service, I'm only going to need one ambulance. However, I have already sent 6 to these 2 hospitals. So it's very much a conversation that you would need to have preferably with a dispatcher rather than the call taker, because although it might not become a major incident for them, there may be other consequences which would impact on their day-to-day operations, and it's important to consider your own day-to-day operations as well.
That's great. No, I'm just thinking, if you phoned up and started your methane with "I'm declaring a major incident," etc., and you get to the end and say, "I need one ambulance."
So it's just being very careful in that declaration, isn't it? It's being careful by saying, we have a major incident for us on site, but it is likely not to be for you. I will give you the rest of the ETHANE. And then hopefully, as I say, you'll have a dispatcher rather than the call taker. If you're running an event and you've got sufficient capacity that it could be a major incident for you, but not the ambient service, you're probably going to have a direct phone number for the EOC, bronze, or the dispatch desk for your area. And you're more likely to have that kind of sensible and rational conversation rather than with a call taker who needs to follow, the normal script, or that script they never use except when somebody shouts at them.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
No problem, Duncan. Teddy, you're raising your hand. Do you have a question? I'm just going to see if admin will unmute you there. Feel free to ask away, or if you can't manage to unmute yourself, just ask. David, absolutely, yes. If you're ringing a call taker, they can very, very easily panic if you get that wrong. So it is just being very clear what you're calling about, what your situation is, and what you need from them. Teddy, we're asking you to unmute yourself if you want to ask that question, but I can't hear anything. Marie, the link to the slides has been posted in this chat by ProMed admin. There also, if you email us, we will put it in the email with your CPD certificate, and they will be on our website tomorrow as well. Okay, if anybody else has got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. Gemma, absolutely, that is what CPD is all about. It does remind you of a few things that you forget. Certainly when I was planning this webinar, I had my JR Calc full book, I had my major incident medical management support book next to me, I had my little action cards next to me, I had ProMed's major incident protocols open. This is true. I didn't just do this from memory. This is something that I absolutely prepared for, because if we don't do that, then it's very easy to forget these things. Alan, the police handle methane cause the best. I've never rang the police with one, so I wouldn't know personally. In terms of our next session, we're just going to launch another poll for you because we'd like to know what you want us to do a webinar on. Teddy, your question's already been answered. That's great to hear. If anybody else has any other questions, just throw up a quick a multiple choice. You can answer as many of these as you want. So we're probably going to move these to Thursday evenings at 7. And that's because our training partner, STC Training Solutions, they run a clinical series of webinars on Monday evenings at 7. They'll be looking on Monday at immediate life support, aimed at kind of advanced FREC 3s, FREC 4s, and healthcare professionals. Do sign up for their webinar. The links are on our Facebook page. Innes and Charlotte are excellent commissions, and they deliver their training really well. That's why we partnered with them. I can see about half of you there giving us some ideas there. Major incidents, interacting with our services, and the planning process absolutely seems to be something that people are really kind of invested in, the triage process and casualty clearing stations. So we are going to take your feedback on board. We are going to design these next Thursday at 7. We will have our next webinar live. Thank you very much. Alan, yep, the police don't have a protocol to go through. You're right. A police call handler listens to what you tell them and then implements it into an open text box and categorizes it what they feel is right for that call. And that then goes up to the dispatcher. Absolutely perfect. You're right. I have actually spoken to people in police control rooms myself, and I have worked in CCTV rooms. So yes, when I think about it like that, yes. Andrew, major instant course refresher and eye opener. That's great to hear, Matt. You're very welcome. Indeed, there will be more in the future. Just going to end that poll there so you can have all your screens back. I think triage process at major instance will probably be our next one, given as so many of you have asked for it. We'll probably do these in priority order. If there are any other types of webinar that you would like us to do, again, just webinars at promed999.co.uk. Any suggestions just to keep us going, that would be absolutely brilliant. So again, just a quick reminder there, if you do want your CPD certificate, email webinars@promed999.co.uk. Make sure you got your full name as it's appeared on Zoom. If your full name is different to what's been on Zoom, please tell us both. Otherwise, we won't be able to verify that you've been in the session throughout. We'll get that to you in 3 business days. We'll include a link to the slides if you've lost it in the ether of the chat. We'll include a link to the YouTube video, which we're hoping to have online later this evening as well. Thank you very much for staying for the Q&A. We have provided the webinar and the Q&A totally free of charge. Please leave us at least 1 review. If you would like to do more than 1 review, absolutely fantastic. We'd love that. Whatever rating, whether it's 1 star or 5 stars, is entirely your choice. You tell us how you found it, how you think we can do better, because we want to make these as good as we possibly can for you. So those links from ProMed admin in the chat there, Trustpilot, Yelp, Google, and Facebook, which will be excellent. Just going to leave the screen there. I'm going to kill my video and kill my audio. Just going to leave the screen there. So if there is anything you need to go back to in the chat, feel free. We are still going to be online for the next 5-10 minutes or so. So if you do think of any questions, we will respond to them. It will more likely be via chat rather than video or by speech. So thank you very much for staying, everybody. Good night. Stay safe, stay alert, control the virus, and save lives.